Hey, how you doing? It is episode 176 of the Notcast. Today it is Thursday, the 13th of January, 2022. Pretty crazy to still be living in the year of the future, the year of Soylent Green, and the year of Mark Hamill's immortal film, Time Runner, which, by the way, is absolutely rubbish and is better than Ready Player One. Today, part two of me talking about Steven Spielberg movies. I'm going to go through a ranking of what I regard to be pretty much the top 20 Steven Spielberg movies. I may run out of time because I could get quite enthusiastic about some of them, especially when we get to the bigger numbers like numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Not going to get hugely enthusiastic, for example, about number 16, which, by the way, in a sneak preview, is Catch Me If You Can. We're going to start off with number 20, made in 1986, The Colour Purple. This is complete Oscar bait, by the way. 100% designed to win awards, but also it's a very well made film. It has a couple of issues in the translation between the book and the film. It drops a romantic subplot, for example, that's in the book. But the film itself is, I think, a very well made, very tasteful film. But again, like Amistad's, like some of the other ones as well, it's a film that really it hits you over the head with the hammer of morality and tells you that, racism is bad, guys. And I'm like, well, I knew that. It's like going to a U2 gig and being told that war is bad. I'm like, dude, we already worked that out. It's a good film, but I think it's quite obvious. It's quite touching. It's quite nice. There's lots of lovely scenes in it, but it is Oscar bait. It is the type of film that is designed to be watched 40 years after its release, and people go, yep, absolutely fantastic film, a stunning snapshot of sentimentality, of Spielbergian superlativeness, or something like that. Good, not great. Where we start with number 19, though, this from here on in, pretty much all classics. Plenty of Oscar bait in there, at least 7 of them, I think, without checking the numbers. This is the film that brought Steven Spielberg to a lot of people's attention. The 1971 TV movie from ABC, Jewel. And here is one of the Steelbook editions. Unlike most Steelbook editions of DVDs, this one has not yet rusted to fuck, to put it technically. But it does only contain the theatrical version of the film. And having seen the TV version of the film, the theatrical version of the film is a little bit padded. It's got extra scenes, extra shots. It's been made out to just make up the running time so it can fit long enough into a theatrical screening. It's like someone squeezed a 74-minute movie into an 88-minute movie. And talking of TV versions, I saw the 2 films which I hadn't mentioned in the previous episode, 1973 Savages and 1972 Something Evil. Today, they are both, to be honest, better than The Mission and worse than Ghost Train, so I would put those at respectively numbers 35 and 36 in the Spielberg canon. They are rushed, mediocre TV movies. Jewel is absolutely not a rushed, mediocre TV movie. It is a fantastic and assured first feature which really feels like a fantastic film as opposed to a rushed TV movie. It is far, far better than its original first life as a television movie would ever betray. It kind of has some of the same themes that also appear in things like Sugarland Express, Jaws. It's around, a dogged single pursuit of one party by another. This also appears obviously in Jaws and Sugarland Express. It's around one person facing something that they don't necessarily want to, and then having to be pursued by that. It's great. Also, by the way, at the end of the film, they have mixed in, I think, a dinosaur roar with the noise of the truck when the truck blows up to kind of indicate that there was something primordial and possibly, subhuman and animal around the very truck itself. Really good film. The ABC TV version is available. I have posted a link to it in my previous video, so you can watch that and see what a slicker, faster version of the film might look like. Whichever version you watch, they're still both really good films. Bruce says hi, by the way. Next thing that we've got is my number 18, Empire of the Sun, starring Christian Bale in his pre-Batman, pre-American Psycho days. I saw this at the cinema. I have very little memory of watching it in the cinema as a 13-year-old, but it's a Steven Spielberg movie. It's got a plane. It's set in a Second World War in it. There's a dogfight going on. It's probably going to be good. Not for a 13-year-old, it isn't. It's a story of a child that loses contact with his parents during the Second World War and spends most of the Second World War in a kind of expat prisoner of war camp. It's got some fantastic scenes in it. There is a scene set in a baseball stadium near the end of the movie where Christian Bale thinks he's seeing the spirit of somebody, but he's actually, and by the way, this film is 35 years old now, so these aren't spoilers now. If it's not on you to have watched it in the past 33, 35 years, past third of a century, that's on you, it's not on me. So he's in a baseball stadium or a football stadium that is abandoned and full of looted objects and jewellery, and he thinks he sees the soul of somebody who's just died at the moment that they die, and it actually coincides with the kind of like the halo from a nuclear explosion that obviously brought the Second World War to its knees. It's a fabulous, beautiful moment that is better, I think, than the rest of the film. It's still a really underrated film. A lot of people think, oh, it's just Spielberg being Spielberg, and it's much, much better than just Spielberg being Spielberg. It's a really good historical epic, and it's done with a lightness of touch that some of the other ones that he's made around about the same time absolutely don't have. The other thing I will say in its favour is it has aged very, very well indeed. John Malkovich has a fantastic role in it. It's a powerful film. Empire of the Sun, my number 18, really, really good. Number 17 then, we're on a bit of a run now, by the way, of historical epics. Actually, they're all historic for the next 4 movies, although one of them maybe not for the reasons you might think. Number 17 is Lincoln, Daniel Day-Lewis, chewing the scenery, going full method here. Again, it is a powerful historical epic that focuses, like Amistad, actually on a very small fragment of one person's life. And it's got Adam Driver in it. Oh, Adam Driver. Anyway, it's a very good historical epic that's got a very effective approach to it. It's really good, but really good by Spielberg standards. Still doesn't put you in the top 15. Again, complete Oscar bait. Hopefully it won something, although it was a winner of 2 Academy Awards, including Best Actor Daniel Day-Lewis. So I guess sometimes they take the bait when you put the Oscar bait up there. Really good historical epic. Now, we get to number 16. This one is Catch Me If You Can, as I told you earlier. It's fun, surprisingly fun. It's kind of like a spy versus spy caper where, again, one person is chasing another person and the first person doesn't want to be caught, about identity theft, about how you can be able to define and create your own identity and your own destiny, and you can be who you want to be as long as you don't follow society's conforms and qualifications. It's a fun little movie. It's got a lot of heart, a lot of soul. Works really, really well. Really like it. Tom Hanks is in it, so of course it's quite good. Tom Hanks doesn't necessarily make bad movies. Leonardo DiCaprio is in it, and I think it's got some fantastic music by John Williams, which is very atypical. You would think all the John Williams music would be huge, bombastic epics about space and war and space wars and things like that. But no, Catch Me If You Can is a little bit different. It's got a nice, light, jazzy touch to it, and it's got a fantastic credit sequence actually that's better than anything that's been in any of the James Bond films, including Never Say Never Again. So Catch Me If You Can, number 16, recommend it. We're going to get into number 15 now. From here, it's all killer, no filler, baby. No two ways about it. It is Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Not perhaps a film that has aged particularly well, but I think it's a really good film, and I'll kind of explain why. The first thing first is Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is a prequel. It's one of the very first prequels that there was, apart from, I think, possibly something like the Young Adventures of Billy the Kid or whatever stupid movies that they were making at that point to try and bring you into the cinema. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. If you're watching the Indiana Jones films in the sequence that the story is told, this is the first film that you should see, and it's important that you see it as this is the first film instead of Raiders of the Lost Ark, because at the start of this film Indiana Jones is motivated by money, he's a skeptic, he's an unbeliever in religion and power and spirituality. He is focused more on the cash value of golden objects and shiny trinkets. And he's basically not that nice a guy. He's almost a historical mercenary. And Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is a film that details his conversion through to believing in a higher power into spirituality. It's a little bit racist, which is a terrible shame for a film like this. And I think it's a little bit tasteless. And it really leans into the whole bugs and spiders thing. By the way, this is George Lucas's divorce movie. If you think all that imagery of people having their hearts plucked out while still beating and thrown away as they die is in any way a coincidence compared to George Lucas going through a brutal divorce, then you're completely wrong. This is his movie, which is about divorce and having your heart ripped out from your still beating chest. Also, it has one of the best visual jokes ever. There is a fantastic visual joke involving a swordsman and a gun in Raiders of the Lost Ark. This film shows what happens if you don't have a gun in that pocket. There is a genuine sword fight, and it's a brilliant joke that pays back from 3 years of patience when everybody watches Raiders of the Lost Ark and goes, that's fantastic. You're expecting a huge sword fight, and yeah, Indiana Jones just shoots the guy dead. 40 years, by the way, not a spoiler. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom shows what happens if you don't have the gun and you have to indulge in the sword fight. So it's a great payoff. It's a joke 4 years in the making. So Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, really good. Fantastic model work. Vic Armstrong gets killed in it, and of course he's one of the world's greatest stuntmen. I recommend this movie highly, although it has to be seen in the prism of the time in which it was made and the time in which it was set, which are both a very, very long time away from now. And you think about actually the gap between today and when Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was made is only 38 years. And 38 years before Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was made, and let's roll back, that was 1946. And of course that film is set in 1935. So culture has moved a long way away. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is only just this side of the halfway point between the year in which it was set and the present day. Mind blown. Insert the GIF from the internet, of course. Number 14 on the list, a late period historical epic, Bridge of Spies. Oh look, Tom Hanks. Thanks, Tom. It's been at least a few years since you made a movie with Steven Spielberg. Time to do another one. Like the other ones, this is it's not flashy. It's not a big historical epic. It's not trying to achieve great things. It's not telling you about the power of human emotion or equality or mortality or whatever. Bridge of Spies is a film about exactly that. The Bridge of Spies in Berlin, between East and West Berlin in the Cold War, and hostage exchanges between caught Russian spies who are on the Western side and caught Western spies who are on the Russian side. It doesn't follow the traditional 3-act payoff that you will have in a standard narrative of stasis, crisis, and resolution, because real life doesn't work in that necessary position or in that particular structure. And it's got some really interesting and fascinating ideas. It tells a story of the Cold War which hasn't really been told previously, around how people were living and loving in the midst of war. It's a really good film. It's very sensitive, very light touch, very subtle in some of its approaches. I think it's really good, very underrated. Number 13. This will surprise you because I think this is complete blockbuster bait. Jurassic Park, as Alan Partridge said. I saw this film in the cinema 1993 at the age of 20 on a date with my then girlfriend who had fantastic taste in movies. And there were bits where I was watching it and thinking, how did they do that? I know how they did that. They did that with computers, but how did they do it? So it's revolutionary from a CG perspective. So, for example, Terminator 2, where they had the scenes with the T-1000, Richard Patrick turning into and turning out of liquid metal. When Steven Spielberg saw that, and he was like, I now know we have the technology to make Jurassic Park, a film about dinosaurs and a dinosaur-themed theme park. And of course, George Lucas, watching Jurassic Park, saw it and thought, we now have the technology to achieve what I want to do with the Star Wars prequels. So for Jurassic Park, it is dragged down slightly by the fact that without Jurassic Park, there would be no Star Wars The Phantom Menace. But the flip side of that is The Phantom Menace is really good. I really like it. I think it's much better than a lot of people give it credit for, because it is basically a fairy tale told from the perspective of an 8-year-old boy. Jurassic Park is fantastic, blockbuster, popcorn crunching, cinema, rolling in the aisles. It's a kind of experience that you don't get very often in the cinema anymore. I think when I saw this, there might have been a round of applause at the end, which I've not seen for a very, very, very long time. Obviously, being British, people don't tend to show emotions in the cinema because, British, no feelings, right? But Jurassic Park, really great blockbuster movie. We're on to number 12 now. I think there's some really, really great, solid films that are coming out at this point, by the way. And what you've got with War of the Worlds, my number 12. This is basically, in my opinion, it is Steven Spielberg's 9/11 movie. And there is no coincidence with the fact that this was released 4 years after 9/11. The shots of urban devastation, the dust that's in the air, people being wiped out by forces that they don't understand, comprehend, and weren't necessarily expecting. And regular people suddenly finding themselves on the front line of war in an American city. War of the Worlds is fantastic. It's powerful, it's vibrant, it's got some fantastic and really interesting ideas around paranoia, belief, strength, courage, emotion. And it's got some really interesting concepts at heart about what would happen actually if the society in which we've grown to understand and live in, what would happen if that ceased to operate in a way in which we understood it to be. Lots of great set pieces. Yes, the aliens are not that clever because they forgot to realise that they were going to be killed by the bacteria that surrounds them, much like the aliens in M. Night Shyamalan's Signs. But also, War of the Worlds is a great movie. You can sit there and you can just switch your brain off. You can watch the explosions, and you can go, really brilliant, well done. It's a film that Michael Bay wished he could have made, but he's just not good enough to do it. And yes, I have seen Pain and Gain, which is, by the way, my favourite Michael Bay movie. War of the Worlds is really, really, really good. Really good indeed. And yes, it's got Tom Cruise in it. I know some of you really like Tom Cruise. You have fantastic taste. I think Tom Cruise is really, really good despite himself. I don't like Tom Cruise movies because Tom Cruise is Tom Cruise in them. I like Tom Cruise movies because he chooses good movies to make, with a couple of exceptions at the very beginning of his career, most notably All the Right Moves. But War of the Worlds is a fantastic movie. It's a great modern day war movie with a refreshing spin on it, and I think it's very much Steven Spielberg's 9/11 movie. Now, the next one that we've got in the list, number 11, Minority Report, based upon the book by Philip K. Dick. Pretty much everything that Philip K. Dick ever wrote, apart from his shopping list, has now been optioned as a movie. There have been some terrible Philip K. Dick movies. There have been some fantastic ones. Minority Report is very definitely one of the really interesting, great ones. And with all Philip K. Dick books, what you're doing is you're extrapolating a potential future from the seeds that have already been set in the present day. So things like A Scanner Darkly, Blade Runner, Next, Total Recall, they're all Philip K. Dick stories. And again, Minority Report is another really exciting approach to this. I think of it very, very highly. I think it's a very deft, very prescient film, and there's some elements in there that they're kind of extrapolating out. What would the future be like 20-30 years from now? And as Matt Johnson saying, the future is now and it's all going wrong. And I think one of the tracks on the Soul Mining album from 1983, Minority Report, is a possible future that we could have had where things went a little bit wrong. And to an extent, there's already degrees of prediction in Minority Report that are coming true. We haven't quite got to the stage of pre-crime, but we're definitely at the point where you can start to predict who's going to behave in certain ways through the algorithms and the information that you have on the social medias and the internets. Sorry, I'm sounding like Grandpa Simpson there. Everybody on the internets and the social medias, kids, and on the TikToks, etc. Call blimey governor. Minority Report is a very good film. It's really strong and very well done. And it's, I really like it. Really like it. Right, so that's number 11. So we're in the top 10. Now, there are only 9 Steven Spielberg films in my top 10. What one is not going to be a Steven Spielberg film? Hold on tight, because there are 2 films in my top 10 that aren't Steven Spielberg movies. I know, crazy, huh? Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade is number 10. I love this film. It's funny, it's silly, it gives Michael Sheard another opportunity to dress up as Hitler, and he's played Hitler more times than anybody else on screen. It's got a fantastic line where Indiana Jones throws somebody out of a Zeppelin for not having a ticket. It's got some really inventive scenes. So there's the scene where they're being chased by, I think, some kind of German Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf or whatever it is, and Sean Connery, Papa Jones Sr., with the aid of merely a umbrella, manages to save the day. It's lovely. It's got just the right tone of incredulously, in whatever the word is, and credibility. It's everything that could have happened. And even right down to the end, where everything is perfect in terms of how it's written. There's all the mysteries are set up at the beginning, all the answers are given at the end, and everything stands up internally. Bad films have plot holes in moments where, if everything's passing you by so fast, you don't necessarily watch it, and you go, "Oh, hang on, what about that? No!" And as you can say from Ready Player One, I'm very keen to press the bullshit button if a film isn't particularly good. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is a perfect Rubik's Cube of plot lines and threads, and everything is paid off all the way through it. Even right down to things like only the penitent man will pass. The fact that he chose poorly and died. The fact that if you take it over the seal, certain things happen. And of course, it's got that lovely bit where the tank goes over the edge of the cliff and everybody thinks something dreadful's happened, and it hasn't. It also, by the way, has given us the best gift that's ever been on the internet, which is Indiana Jones punching a Nazi. And if I could bring one thing back from the year of the 2000s, it would be that Nazis are inherently bad, because they are. Anyway, of course, in the Indiana Jones films, the Nazis are the bad guys. It's not even up for debate. You don't get a president turning up and going, "Well, there are good people on both sides." No, there aren't. Nazis are Nazis are Nazis, guys. Not cool. And Steven Spielberg also makes this particularly clear in my number 9 choice, Saving Private Ryan. It's obviously it's Oscar bait, very much so. I watched it very recently. That opening 25 minutes are probably the most realistic depiction of war at that time that you could get. Probably only things like Dunkirk and 1917 recently have come close to it, but obviously they're heavily influenced by Saving Private Ryan. It is, generally speaking, a strange film because the plot does not make sense. Why, in a gazillion years, would you send a team of crack commandos, the A-team, behind enemy lines to go and rescue a guy just so that the whole family doesn't get wiped out? You wouldn't risk 10 guys' lives for one guy. That's bad military planning, guys. Bad planning. That's movie generals, not actual generals. But aside from that, everything else about Saving Private Ryan is, I think, solid, durable, very well done, very, very respectable war film. I don't particularly like it. It does feel a little bit obvious when you're being manipulated into certain emotional outcomes, but I do think it's a really good film. I like it. I admire it more than I like it. As Ash would say, I admire its purity. So we're into the top 8. And where are we going to go with the top 8? Well, 7 Spielberg films to go. 8, Artificial Intelligence, a project that was gifted from Stanley Kubrick to Steven Spielberg. Kubrick's fingerprints are all over this movie. It's the closest thing to a collaboration which I think Steven Spielberg has ever done, actually, because most of the time he has been the captain in charge of the ship. In Artificial Intelligence, huge amounts of what happens on screen were preset and predefined, but Stanley Kubrick, I think, didn't have the warmth in his filmmaking style to make Artificial Intelligence work. And that is in no way a criticism. Kubrick's films are masterpieces, but they are cold, they are calculating, and they aren't particularly warm and fuzzy. And AI needs that little bit of human warmth in it, which Kubrick movies don't tend to have. So all the things which people say don't work in AI, the ending, for example, that's 100% Kubrick. The only thing that I think takes me out of this film in terms of the Kubrickness of it, and I can watch it as You know, basically 95% a Stanley Kubrick movie, and at the same point, 95% a Steven Spielberg movie, is the music. Kubrick always used needle drops of existing music. Very, very rarely did he use original music, and when he did use original music, it was normally an electronic score. So Wendy or Walter Carlos, for example, in Clockwork Orange and The Shining, and also Abigail Mead for which was, by the way, one of Kubrick's daughters under a pseudonym for Full Metal Jacket. The musical palette which John Williams uses, which is, you know, a standard classical approach of a big orchestra playing together in a big room all at the same time, is probably the wrong soundtrack choice for AI. That's the thing I would change about AI. Otherwise, it's a really great film, and it's got some really powerful moments in it that addresses things like nature and identity and who you are. Okay, so we're into top 7. Top 7, right? Number 7 is Munich, starring the Incredible Hulk, Eric Bana. This is not the last of the historical epics, but it's kind of like the flip side to War of the Worlds. It's a film around the activities of Israeli secret agents as they track down the terrorists that were responsible for the Munich massacre at the Olympic Games in 1972, and around how they track down the people that were responsible for and paid for that, and basically kill them. It's dark, it's moody, it's kind of like almost an answer to War of the Worlds. So if War of the Worlds is, you know, mankind on the ropes, Munich is mankind after the war, picking up the pieces and getting revenge. It is the most elaborate set of Taken style revenge traps that I think I've ever seen. It's ambiguous, it's cold, but it needs to be cold, actually. And it's powerful. I think it's a really good film about how the desire for revenge, not justice, revenge, guys, because justice is set at a certain level and revenge is always too far. How a desire for revenge can pervert and distort your original ideas and integrity and ideals in what has become, something that will ultimately consume you. Right, number 6. This one is going to be controversial, boys and girls, but I think you can cope with it. Number 6 is a film not directed by Steven Spielberg, but directed by Steven Spielberg at the same time. It is Poltergeist, which is the German word for noisy ghost. The authorship of this film is in dispute, not in terms of the names that are on the credits list, but in terms of who directed it. Steven Spielberg allegedly directed huge chunks of the film, and Tobe Hooper was not particularly present at certain parts. Other parts, Tobe Hooper was very, very clearly the director of this film. So it is a film with two parents as opposed to one, and it's a strange film in that respect. But watching it, I saw it very recently, and I thought, that is a Steven Spielberg movie. So much about this film screams Steven Spielberg's touch. You know, the opening, the suburbia, which is suddenly kind of invaded by an unexpected visitor, just like E.T. And E.T. was originally written as a screenplay called Watch the Skies, about a dangerous alien that invaded a suburban home. The film was split into two parts. E.T., the nice friendly alien that became friends with the family, and Poltergeist, around the evil spirit that invaded a home. And these two films were released very, very closely to each other. They are effectively two sides of the same coin. Poltergeist is the closest thing to a late period classic horror movie. It is a fantastic film from the golden summer of 1982, when horror movies were all over the place, and that's the summer which had The Thing and Star Trek and Blade Runner and Tron and a whole bunch of other movies were all released at the same time alongside E.T. and Poltergeist. It's a strong film. I really like it. It's got some brilliant ideas in it. The soundtrack by Jerry Goldsmith is mwah! Jerry Goldsmith's a very, very talented man, by the way, and fantastic at horror movie soundtracks, as anybody that's heard the soundtrack to the Omen 3, Omen 2, Final Conflict, and Omen number 1 by Jerry Goldsmith can say. And it's just a really good, brilliant, powerful, classic horror movie. I really like it. Let's pretend that there are no Poltergeist sequels. Number 5 is the most recent of the major Spielberg movies, I think. Is very, very underrated. It is The Post. The Post is a film around, I'm going to read off the box art here, the incredible true story of the unlikely partnership between the Washington Post's editor and owner as they strive to expose a massive cover-up of devastating government secrets, risking their careers and very freedom in a fight for the truth. The Post can effectively be seen as a prequel to All the President's Men, and the very last shot of the Post is exactly the same, although it's a modern day recreation, of the very first shot of All the President's Men. If you watch the Post and you haven't seen this, and if you've seen this and you haven't watched the Post, you're missing out. These two films really need to be viewed together. I think the Post is a good, intelligent, smart movie that goes into detail around the powers around the power of secrets, ownership, information, responsibility, and power. And of course, we've seen in the current COVID situation a government that is unafraid to lie to people about certain things, like did they have a party or not? If there was a party, I wasn't there. If I was there, I'm sorry I offended you. And if I offended you, I did follow the rules. It's that kind of bizarre bluff, double bluff, bullshit lies and nonsense, which is, I think, really, the Post is a modern day treatise upon a number of things. But of course, you watch the Post now, you think about the post-truth environment with Donald Trump, who has been spreading misinformation around the election. Guys, he lost, all right? I don't think this is controversial. Trump lost. And also, where you have things like Joe Rogan putting out COVID-19 misinformation, the Post is around the power of the truth and the facts in an age which seeks to conceal, distort, and manipulate reality to serve other people's ends. I think it's a really, really good film. It's the kind of film that they don't make anymore, and they should make more films like The Post. I think it is fantastic. It's his last, well, to date, it's his latter period masterpiece. Well worth watching. And if you've got All the President's Men, stick it on straight after you finish the Post. Don't forget to go for a wee and have a cup of tea in the meantime. Number 4, I know at least one person on my friends list, this is their very, very favourite movie of all time. It is not mine, but it is bloody marvellous. That film is Jaws, the film that started it all off. Here's the Blu-ray version that's got a number of extra features on it, including a couple of documentaries, 7.1 sound, and so on and so forth. Jaws has birthed 1,000 copycats. It is the classic haunted house movie. Hello, my name is Bruce. Howdy, howdy, howdy. As the shark in Toy Story said. And Jaws is a perfect film about a perfect killing machine and its job in killing people. It's a classic of the haunted house genre. Films like it's been massively influential on films like Alien and all the other films. Let's pretend that there are no Jaws sequels. No Jaws sequels, despite what your lion eyes might tell you. And it's a fantastic haunted house movie with a monster in the dark stalking people that are trapped in an environment and can't get out. The environment being the boat. Jaws has a lot of modern day comparisons to COVID. Boris Johnson always sees himself as the mayor of Amity that wants to keep the beaches open and the economy ticking, in spite of facing down the fact that there is clearly a huge, great big monstrous shark that just wants to eat people. And Jaws is perfect in that. It follows up the same kind of themes that we've got in Duel and Sugarland Express, and to a later extent things like War of the Worlds, about the systematic extermination and destruction and chasing of a person or a group or an object or a number of people. Jaws is about terror. And it's about when something doggedly wants to pursue you and to bring harm and hurt onto you, and you can't do anything about it. Again, like Raiders of the Lost Ark and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and the Last Crusade, it's perfectly constructed. Everything has a payoff in there. It all makes sense. And thank God for once that actually in the novel of Jaws, they've managed to drop the truly awful subplot where Brody's wife has an affair with Hooper, because that's completely unnecessary and purely has gratuitous sex and senseless violins in it. So Jaws, absolutely brilliant. There's a documentary called Inside Jaws that's on Vimeo that I'll post a link to. There's also Jaws, the Inside Story documentary DVD. If you're a Jaws geek, get this. And don't forget, get this jumper, but not my one because I'm using it. There is also a brilliant book called The Making of Jaws, written by Edith Blake, which is probably quite hard to get these days. These were mass market paperbacks. They used to sell hundreds of them. The art of the great movie novelisation is dead, which is such a shame, and that's probably why Quentin Tarantino has done one for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. These are fascinating little books, well worth getting if you get a chance to see them. They're probably quite expensive now. The paperback versions for The Empire Strikes Back, Once Upon a Galaxy, sells for an enormous amount of money. So, number 3 then. There are 3 Spielberg movies left, and the astute of you have already been working out what those three are. So, the third film is both a Spielberg film that doesn't exist and a Spielberg film that does exist. The best Spielberg film I have never seen exists on screen for 1 minute and 15 seconds or thereabout in Clerks the Animated Series, and it is called Flintstone's List, where Steven Spielberg remakes Schindler's List using Barney Rubble and Fred Flintstone as the main characters, and it's set in the Jurassic era. It is fantastic, it's hilarious. I had tears of tasteless laughter the time that I watched Flintstone's List in Clerks the Animated Series. It is the perfect combination of blockbuster epic and Oscar bait. But that film doesn't exist, apart from for about a minute on the Clerks DVD. Number 3 instead has to go to Schindler's List. I saw this film in the cinema, 1993. Can you imagine being Stanley Kubrick and making both Jurassic Park and Schindler's List the same year? You know, looking at the rushes from Schindler's List on the set of Jurassic Park and deciding certain editing choices whilst you're also dealing with huge CG dinosaurs. It's powerful. It's the work of his life, I think. It's probably the one that's got the most meaning to him. And it's a film that you really need to see, because before Schindler's List, there hadn't really been a film that I'd seen that really truly grasped the horror of those events and then depicted it in a way that was realistic. You know, you had things like Sven Hassel's Murder Camps of the SS or something, which was, top shelf paperback titillation for people. Cunningly priced at 69p. Of course it was 69p, but you didn't have much in the way of serious kind of deadly serious blockbuster level mass accessible films around the Holocaust. Schindler's List is a very, very powerful film. It's very, very well done. It's a masterpiece. It really, really, really is. And that means we now have 2 films. And of course, by bringing up number 2, you're going to be able to guess what number 1 is. So, number 2 is above and beyond all other things. It is Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, despite what it says on the cover of the Blu-ray and DVD here, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, it is always going to be Raiders of the Lost Ark, featuring the Drew Struzan poster artwork. Drew Struzan, by the way, if you don't know, is one of the finest movie poster painters and designers of all time. He has done some phenomenal work. You will know his stuff like Back to the Future and The Goonies and Raiders of the Lost Ark and Star Wars. You will recognise his work. There's a very specific style that Drew Struzan works in. It's here right on the front of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. This, I think, was the UK film poster. This, I think, was the American version. Raiders of the Lost Ark is a perfect adventure movie. It's the first film of its style, so you do need to watch it after Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom if you're doing things strictly chronologically. But it is a fantastic movie. Everything that's set up in the rest of the movie is set up actually in the first few minutes. You've got the fear of snakes, you've got the double cross, you've got Belak in there, Belosh. You've got all of the component parts of the film. You've got Indiana Jones as the adventurer that's seeking out weird and unusual religious artifacts. You've got betrayal. It's all there. It's as good an opening scene as anything else that you will see. Now, Raiders of the Lost Ark very, very clearly is designed around emulating and creating Steven Spielberg's very own James Bond franchise, because he couldn't get to do a James Bond film, but he does it brilliantly in this. It's 40 years old now. Some of the attitudes that are in the film are outdated. They were outdated when the film came out, but then the film was set in 1936, 1937, so it's completely understandable that some of those attitudes are out of date. They were out of date when the film came out. It's got every set piece is perfect in it, in terms of the logical construction, the way in which the film is constructed, the upping of the ante, the introduction of the characters, the themes that you deal with, and then by the time you get to the last 20% of the film, suddenly what you realise, and this is a fantastic bait and switch, because you expect Indiana Jones, being the hero of the movie, to go and sort everything out and solve everything. He doesn't. There are higher powers at hand than Indiana Jones, and they manage to show that actually, as a man, he is just a man. There are higher powers in it, and even though he can, fly planes and survive submarines and drive trucks and steal things from the Nazis and all that stuff, he's just a man. There is also a very telling line in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where halfway through he says, "I don't know, I'm making this up as I go along." And that's actually a really important line of dialogue, because loads of adults are making this stuff up as they go along and hoping that they don't screw it up. Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of the perfect films. It's also got the fantastic sequence with the flying wing, and were I a gazillionaire with a huge mansion, I would put in a planning permission application to have 2 planes in the grounds of my mansion. One would be a life-size MiG-31, the Firefox from the Clint Eastwood film. The other one would be a life-size flying wing from Raiders of the Lost Ark, without, of course, the nasty swastikas on it. And of course, this film introduced one of the main tropes that we have of the internet, which is Nazis are bad, in case you hadn't worked out. Right, number 1. There can only be number 1, can't there? There can only be one. What is number 1? Well, I think this is one of the best films ever made. And this is Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It's very telling that Close Encounters of the Third Kind is the only Steven Spielberg movie that comes from an original screenplay that he has birthed solely on his own. It's the only book he's ever written, or officially written, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the novelisation by Steven Spielberg. It really is his very own labour of love. Here's an original 1977 paperback of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And it's a film about obsession, it's a film about compulsion, it's a film about government cover-ups, alien visitation. Everything in it is absolutely perfect. Here's the soundtrack album, and pretty much any shot in Close Encounters of the Third Kind could be hung in an art gallery. They are just phenomenal scenes. It's in every way virtually untouchable. The only thing I would change about Close Encounters of the Third Kind would be that I would do some kind of super mega version with all of the scenes in together that runs for something like 3 hours. Inevitably someone will have done a fan edit of it. That was a soundtrack LP, by the way, and the soundtrack LP came in some versions with a free, gratis, complimentary, not for sale disco remix of the theme on a 7-inch single. How bizarre, how bizarre. There's a very old song from years past went. Here is the document of the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, a lovely glossy paperback of backstage photographs, and including, by the way, and something which you don't get to see enough of here, some of the potential posters that the film was going to have for its release. So lots of marketing ideas, and I mean, just look how gorgeous some of those are there. Any one of those would have been iconic, but this one really did take the biscuit. I think this is near enough the closest thing to a perfect film. If I had to list a top 10, Close Encounters of the Third Kind would be in it. It's a really interesting film about the power of human compulsion, not the power of Christ compelling you, but the idea that when you get obsessed with an idea and it kind of destroys everything else. So some people have their rosebuds. For Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Richard Dreyfuss's character, his rosebud is the belief that there are aliens, that he has seen a UFO and it is real and it is tangible, and there is nothing that you can do that can say that it's not the case. His character is Neary, and he loses his family, and it's also one of the first films I ever saw where a family fractured and fell to bits, and the arguments which I saw in my house when I was growing up were actually similar to the arguments that you had in the film, which is an unusual state of being, really, because normally when you see a film you don't necessarily see things like imperfections, arguments, disagreements, divorce. You see a family fall to pieces in front of your very eyes, much like one of my other favourite films, The Shining, where again a man is driven by a compulsion and an obsession to lose everything that he held dear. Steven Spielberg has said that Close Encounters of the Third Kind is a film that he would not make now if he had the opportunity to do so, because now that he has become a parent, now that he's become a family, he wouldn't be able to leave his family behind in order to get on a spaceship and explore in an outer space. So this is a film by a young, idealistic director, a film that could never be made again, a film that nearly put, I think it's, is it Universal Pictures? It nearly put the film company out of business, so much so that he had to rush the finished version of the film, the theatrical edition, and he had to go back and say, well, actually, there's some extra scenes that I wanted to film that I ran out of money for, which became 1980's special edition of the film, the version that was mostly in circulation when I was younger. Then in 1997, for the DVD version of Close Encounters, the definitive version of the film, which contained the least amount of compromise, when Spielberg had the luxury of 20 extra years to go back and revisit and create a final cut. Close Encounters of the Third Kind is my favourite Steven Spielberg film. It is a masterpiece, and that is where I'm going to end it. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves and each other. Stay beautiful. I will see you all again soon. Love you. Bye.